Good morning. He was talking about that whole demographic of morning, non-morning people. I have this problem because I'm a musician, which means I work at night under the cover of darkness. But I'm also a father, so I wake up every morning and I'm on that father's schedule. And I've always been a morning person, so my work doesn't always line up. But either how, anyway, here's a song to wake us all up. I guess I never told you how the globe burned down. But it ain't no secret, just ask around. Some heartsick man, fed up with his fate, tossed it to the ground in a desperate state. He'd grown tired of the tragedies, tired of the death, tired of watching Romeo take one last breath for something as crazy as love, love, love. Yeah. They gave him all the books, but never taught him to read. So when she first kissed him, I heard him beg and plead. He saw the storm on the water, he felt every swell. He was on top of the mountain, in the belly of a whale. Some days it's a fountain or an artesian well. Sometimes it's a bag of bricks or some kind of spell. There's nothing as wild as love, love, love. He wasn't much for religion, but he learned to pray. For occasions when the wine led his mind astray, he built a chapel for his conscience, a shack for his regrets, some desire to an island. Still he could not forget the sound of her touch, the color of her song, a jumble of words where a space belongs for something as simple as love. Love, oh love, love, love. Good morning. Woo! Just waking it up. So the theme of this month is love, and love is a beautiful thing. It's something that I know that we all exercise in various ways all over the place, but it's also a very soft word. Like the boundaries and edges of love are porous, and they kind of bleed into different parts of our lives in very different ways. And so I'd like to take this idea of love and connect it with the word affection, but not like hugs and kisses and nuptials. We're talking about affection as defined by a fellow Kentuckian, this guy, Wendell Berry. Wendell Berry in 2012 gave the Jefferson Lecture for the National Endowment for the Humanities. And it was this lecture called it all turns on affection. And what does he mean by that? He means affection as in knowledge of a place. Living there and knowing what it needs and how you affect that over a long period of time. And generally, to take a 20-minute lecture and condense it down to 30 seconds or so, he divides folks or parts folks into two categories. We got the boomers, which are probably most of us here at Creative Mornings. We're very mobile people. We travel around. We're involved in technology. We live part of our lives with our friends in different parts of the world. Mobile people, right? And then there's the stickers. These are the folks that really stay in a place, get really involved in a particular community, and invest not only their time, but their body and spirit in a place to really know it. And, he kind of illustrates the difference between those two as, through this story of the news. It's something that we all experience each day. We pull it up on our phones, or we listen to it on the radio, or we watch it on TV, and we hear about terrible things, awful things going on around the world. And in his example, he brings up, the war overseas, and you hear a news story about thousands of people being affected, refugees, people dying, and it gets to you, but it doesn't keep you from eating your breakfast. However, if at that very same moment someone called and said your brother or your sister was in a terrible car wreck, it would stop your day. Now, what's the difference? It's not because as a human we care less about all those other people around the world. I mean, their struggle is real, and we understand that, and we connect to it in different ways. It's because we know our brother and sister deeply, affectionately. We know all the struggles that they've had. We know all the work that they've done to be where they are. And to see that being lost is a really impactful thing. Now, if you're from the mountains of Kentucky and it's your family's heritage land that gets destroyed by mountaintop removal strip mining, that's more affecting than to you than maybe it would be from somebody that's from a city like Louisville who's only really experienced the mountains here or there driving through. It's because we have more knowledge, more affection of a place. So through his definition, I think we can kind of start to apply this to all sorts of things around the world. We can obviously apply it to the environment. We can apply it to business. We can apply it to policing in communities. The idea of really knowing what each other's struggle is and having affection for that can build empathy and bridges. So if we just accept that for a sec, in this creative morning, let's just accept that. How do you build affection? I mean, obviously, there's a need to grow that, to foster it. What tools do you use? What technology? Well, I think that the arts are a great technology, a great tool. And each arts has its own strengths in building affection. I mean, there's kind of the window type arts, journalism, photography, video making. These are the arts that provide us a window into people's lives, a perspective that we can stand on one side and watch. And then there's the disciplines that are more like doors, where they force us to actually spend a time with a subject, where you can't just glance at it, right? You have to actually listen through a full song. You have to actually listen to a whole radio program to actually get the content out of that. And those arts are particular because they use sound in a deep way. And sound is unique for us humans. We have these 5 senses that we know of. And maybe there's more. We just discovered about the microbiome. Anyhow, so of those 5 senses, there's only one that's connected directly to our nervous system before it's processed through our brain, and that's sound. And to that end, sound is a very broad thing that we experience. We have the noisy pollution of the world. We have the intimate sounds of our children when we're raising them. It covers a lot of ground. And so in short, there's language, which is pretty simple. There's not a huge range to it. The words and sounds that I'm making right now can affect you, but they're not big and wide necessarily. And then there's music, which activates a much bigger part of the brain, as I'll talk about later. And that can really take you on a journey. It can make you feel things before you think things. And so I think music can be exploited in a particularly effective way to generate affection, right? If that's the goal. So I'll give you an example. Here's a short story on a small town that I toured through in Spain. Here you go. Notice the scope of the story. So in 2013, I toured through Spain and ended the tour in a small town in the northwest corner of the country called Galicia. Beautiful town, fishing. I happened to be there on a Sunday, and there's only two things open in Galicia on a Sunday: churches and bars. And so you can walk the very empty streets and see very few people unless you peek into the churches and see the church pews or the bars where people are still hanging out. But it's a beautiful place, stone walkways, stone buildings, great architecture. There's the word story. Impactful. Hopefully you got an image of the place. Here's the song story. Let's hear it. On a small town Sunday in Spain, the streets have the city to themselves. The church bells scare the pigeons away as I walk past another empty cafe. You know a man can get lost between the church pew and the barroom stool. And I seem to wander off between the hymnal and the old rock song. Right? So it's just a different feel. You're like walking, and part of that is because of the rhythm and the pacing. You have to be with it. Your brain has to be following that, as opposed to an image which you can scroll through pretty quickly. You know, we're good at that. So that's what I mean by the doors, and music's really good at it. And I'd like to just kind of, there's a benefit to actually playing music as well. So I'll just share a little personal story. I was born and raised here in Kentucky, in Lexington, Kentucky, and I picked up the cello when I was 9 years old. Public schools. Go public schools. And it has since been this force that has pulled me through life and introduced me to so many different peoples, places, and experiences. And it started very young with my grandfather. He's a fiddler. His name's Elvis Henry Cornelius, which is such a good name. And even though I wasn't a fiddler per se, I had this cello. It kind of looked like a fiddle, and he could teach me tunes like it, fiddle tunes on the cello. So he would take me around to all these fiddle gatherings around the state. And there's an important thing that happens at fiddle gatherings, which is you have old-timers teaching tunes to young-timers. And that exchange, that transgenerational exchange, was really, really beneficial to me. At one time, he took me to Ruby and Quentin McDonald's farm. Yeah. Old McDonald's farm. It's true. They had the red barn with the white slats. It's picture perfect. And Ruby and Quentin used to be stars of the Grand Ole Opry in Renfro Valley. They would play their, kind of ham up sort of show where they would make animal sounds and play these beautiful songs. And they sat there with me. She played auto harp and he played harmonica. He'd had a stroke, so he couldn't do all the other tricks that he used to do at the Grand Ole Opry. But they just sat with me and showed me old tunes and tried to get me to make weird sounds on my cello. That was super influential and would not have happened if I wasn't pursuing music, and it affected me in a deep way. Later on in school, probably 5th grade, there was a teacher that noticed my passion for playing things other than classical music on the cello. And so he decided, I'm going to introduce you to the underground important musicians of Lexington, Kentucky. And so he put me in his car, And he drove me around to meet 90-year-old bluesmen that sat there with me to show me all the way that the music should feel. No, that's the right notes, but it ain't the right feel. And old jazzers who had either washed out for some reason or had played through their career, their touring career, and they would teach me things on the cello, and that was hugely influential. That would not have happened if there wasn't a passion for music and an ability to play it. And in truth, it showed me that music was a social art form rather than an industry or a discipline. So the idea that it's part of a language and it's not something that happens on a stage, but it's something that happens amongst people is an idea that maybe we've gotten away from a little bit in the music industry because it's so easy to just listen to an artist, a pro artist, whatever that means. That's one of the things I love about this Creative Mornings is because there's a general acceptance that we're all being creative and making art. So it was amazing to experience it as a social art form. And it is an art form, and it is a discipline. But I would like to propose for this morning that music is also a technology. It is something that has particular attributes and abilities to communicate with people, just the same as our phones or the internet or whatever. We consider all those technologies because they involve machines and computers. But language is a technology, and I believe that music is as well. And so what does music as a technology do? What's it good at? Well, we're learning a lot more about that these days. Now that we have really good magnetic resonance imaging and we have really, really good computers to help process that and really show us how our brains are affected when we're listening to music, when we're playing music, it's really remarkable. And there's one team in particular that I really enjoy watching their work. It's at Northwestern University. They've got the Oral Neuroscience Center, and they study speech and music and the connection in the brain. And we're not going to go super deep into it. Firstly, because it's morning. Secondly, because I ain't no neuroscientist. But just as a quick idea of what it is, musicians, and we're going to use that word broadly, people who listen to and participate in music, very broadly. So that would be all of us. You can actually track the brain waves when you have someone listening to a audio recording of music or even language, speech, and you can actually track the brain waves and pick the recording out of that brain wave. So in black, you see the original waveform. That's how sound looks. It's just a collection of waves, so you can see that up and down. And then in the red, kind of surrounding it, is the cognition of the brain. Basically, the signal that's coming out of the brain to look at how high resolution it is, right? So you can see in young preschoolers that are playing music, it's pretty par for the course, right? They're picking up most of it, it's right in tracking with it. And then you can look as people play music longer and longer and longer in life. Instead of it being a diminishing trait, it's actually an additive trait. It accumulates ability. So you can see that they're actually picking up a wider range of nuance in language. What does that mean? That means when we're talking to each other online or out in the world, if you have trained your brain to be more sensitive to what people are saying and sensitive to what other little sounds they're making, all that high resolution things that we do when we're in person and human and not filtering through some pipe of the internet. When we're in person with somebody, you can actually have a lot more empathy and, more importantly, affection for those people and their situations. Whether that is someone that's homeless living on the streets, or whether that's a police officer working their beat, or whether that's a fellow working on the barge on the Ohio River, 21 days, 21 days off, 21 on, 21 off. Like, what's that like? We can listen in a deeper way if we actually train our minds with not only listening to music, but also participating in music. And I think that's a key part of this technology. Because music is something that we generally think that humans can only make. And if for any of us that participate in popular mainstream music right now that listen to it, it's so mechanized. You would not believe how much of what you're listening to is actually produced by algorithms and samples and synthesizing. Like machines are actually creating a lot of that stuff. And more we're getting used to that sound, and much like a lot of the trades that used to be human only, making food, making clothing, building houses, they're being mechanized these days through different technologies. I mean, more and more we see 3D printing being used, more and more we see laser cutting being used. Like, just we can't just accept that music's always going to be something that is created only by humans, right? As technology gets better and better, the industry of music is going to try to produce, more revenue. I don't know how else to say it. They're going to make more revenue by producing things quicker and with less money. And it's just a lot cheaper to rock it on. I mean, as a film composer, I do it all the time. I mean, I use a sample library to create an orchestra rather than hiring a 10-person orchestra here in town because I can't afford it. No one's going to pay that extra money to do it. And everyone's generally accepted that, well, the machine sounds are almost as good, especially if you throw a little bit of acoustic sound with it. So the question then becomes, why play an instrument? If you can grab an iPad and you can just tap a couple buttons and tell it what you'd like to hear, and it produces something that sounds really good, is ready to go, and fits your need, why would you hire a musician to actually play an instrument to do it? It's kind of a scary thought for me, but it's also a real thought. When I look at my wife, she's a weaver. She is not going to be hired to weave anyone a pair of jeans anytime soon. That's mechanized. That's not a job that's available for her. Probably, thankfully. But just as a point, like, that's something that used to be only made by humans, and now we have the industry that we have. Music can and likely will be and is turning into much of the same thing as an industry. So, why play an instrument? Why pick up a cello? Something that I've been asked by young folks that are very involved in technology. Well, here we have part of our answer when we look at what an instrument can do for you as a piece of technology. It can actually increase your ability and build bridges in your brain and your neural pathways to be a more acute human. I don't know. Like, hopefully all this technology is adding up for us to be better humans. That is my dream. That's my hope. So, the future of playing instruments as a musician, I think, involves kind of health in the same way that organic cooking or yoga or all these other disciplines that have become not necessarily a necessary trait for you to exist in life, but something that improves your abilities as a human and improves your abilities with your brain. Just a theory. So, as an applied, as an application of this idea of music and sound as a technology to generate affection, I want to share with you a sculpture that I was a part of building as a Public Works Collaborative in Lexington, Kentucky. And it is called Livestream, and it takes data from Kentucky's groundwater systems all over the state, and it takes those and it sonifies the data to create an interactive playscape so that you can hear the health of Kentucky's groundwater. What does that look like? It looks like this. It's a series of pipes set up as a playground, and as you can see, there's these little kind of ship portholes, and in those portholes are sensors and small computers that allow us to sonify the data live coming from Kentucky's groundwater monitoring sites and turn those into a musical score. Why do that? Because there's things that we can understand orally that are harder to understand as a number. So we can actually use sonification to understand something that's very complex and hard to measure. And so in doing so, we create an avenue for folks to be able to grow their affection for what is a really limited resource, a very important resource in our state, increasingly so around the country, around the world. Water is our next great issue. So how do we make people more aware of it when it's something that just is kind of invisible to us until we need it, until it needs to come out of the pipe, or until it needs to be stocked somewhere? You know, do we truck it in? So that's the goal of this sculpture, and it's in Lexington, Kentucky at Jacobson Park. It's a permanent installation, and I created the sound system for it as well as the score. So for this first year, you can go and you can hear all kinds of cool cello-y sounds, and our hope is that each year we have a new curating composer. You know, so if there's any composers out there that are excited by this idea, be in touch, because it'll be a really cool thing. So that's an example of using sound and music to generate affection in today's technological environment. Maybe that technology is not what Wendell Berry was thinking when he talked about being a sticker, about being someone who has affection, but I think that it's another measure of affection, because we, especially my generation, have grown up with technology. It is a part of our place. It is a part of our identity. And so to just, define a sticker as someone who lives on a farm and knows that piece of land might be a little bit of a limited definition. I think that we can all be stickers by being more open, by using sound and music and all the other art forms to grow affection for each other. And I think it can build some very important bridges. Those bridges can be in our brain for our own personal health. Those bridges can be to our environment and understanding what a piece of land or what a resource like water means to someone where they live. It could be in a community to help build bridges and trust between police and those being policed. There's a lot of strength to using the arts, not as some soft, hopefully this will help build some bridges. No, as a definitive technology to actually build bridges between people, because that's the hardest thing that technology struggles with, because it separates people. We all look on our own phones, but music, sound, arts are something that we do as a society. It's a social art form. So I think it's a very, very important technology, and I think we should look at it as such. And to wrap that up, I think we could all use a little Pete Seeger. I think when he wrote this song, in whatever year it was, I'm not quite sure, he was thinking about the dream of connecting the world. The dream of connecting the world with this magical golden thread, this rainbow design, so that we could talk to each other and see the struggles that we all have. And of course now the world is connected by a rainbow design. We're connected by optical fiber all over the world so that we have fast access to each other over the internet. So this song, which was a sort of mystical, folky song back in its day as part of his Rainbow Quest, has now become an actual practical discussion. Like, if we had this design, what would we do with it? So I'll leave you with this tune. It's called Oh Had I a Golden Thread. Thank you so much for having me here at Creative Mornings, and thanks so much for listening. Oh, had I a golden thread and a needle so fine, I would weave a magic strand of rainbow design, of rainbow design. And in it, I'd weave the courage of a woman giving birth. Oh, and in it, I'd weave the innocence of children over all the earth. Oh, children over all the across the water, dear, I'd stretch my magic band to reach out to distant cities so that they would understand. Oh, so that they will understand. Call out to all my brothers and sisters, every human and kind, and I'd bind up this struggling world with hand and heart and mind. Whoa, hand and heart and mind. I said, oh, had I a golden thread and a needle so fine. Thank you so much.